Hi, everyone. I'm Kelly O'Horo, and this is Adaptable, Behavior Explained. Hi there. Thank you so much for joining us on Adaptable today. I'm Kelly O'Horo, your host, and I'm a licensed professional counselor. I'm especially excited to have with us here today my guest, Patrick O'Horo. He is a licensed associate counselor and a trauma specialist, as well as my husband and my personal hero. So, Patrick, thank you so much for being here today.
It's always a pleasure.
We are going to discuss a topic that is very near and dear to my husband's heart. It is from an article called The Peculiar Longevity of Things Not So Bad. And the purpose of our conversation today is to help you understand why you might get stuck in certain patterns or areas of your life and a little bit about the reason that happens. And so, Patrick, go ahead and introduce yourself to me today or to our guests and talk a little bit about what we're going to discuss.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. I've been in the technology space for a long, long time. Counseling is not my primary job. It's a side gig. And I'm always thinking of things from a systems perspective. And as I went through my own interpersonal work and then decided I wanted to be a counselor, a lot of my learnings had to do with humans and society as a system, that same kind of lens. And sometime in grad school, I came across this paper that defines something called the region beta paradox, this peculiar longevity of things not so bad. It was written by Gilbert et al. Like 20 years ago. And it's a pretty short paper, but what I interpreted is our resistance to change. And I love it because for me, every time I look at a problem or a person, I almost see them like a clock. I'm trying to figure out the gears and the springs inside that make them do what they do. And that was really illuminating to me. And it's kind of like the matrix code. For me, once you see it, you can't unsee it. And so now I just see it kind of everywhere. And I know I get some grief from you because I'll be like, region beta paradox, right?
Everywhere we go, there's like moments where you see something, and I have teased you a little bit because I realize that you see it everywhere. But explain to our viewers what this premise is about.
So the premise is that there's a misnomer around how we think things will affect us and how they actually affect us in the long term and in the short term. And so the premise of the paper is that if you were to ask somebody, hey, something really, really bad, somebody would treat you really bad, what would your response be? We'll answer that and we'll predict that the effects would be bad and they would last a long time and it should really be avoided. Right? Like if you offended me, it's going to affect me for a long time. But if you only offend me a little bit, these small transgressions, we tend to get over. And I almost think of it now as death by 1,000 cuts. I think what resonated with the paper so much is just that the title, The Peculiar Longevity of Things Not So Bad.
Right.
And so now I see all throughout our life, this region beta paradox as they plotted out through assessments of people and how they react to what they would consider a transgression against, really proves that we think bad things are to be avoided. And what the science shows us is that bad things stimulate action.
Yeah, we can't grow without discomfort. And a lot of times we internally strive to remain comfortable.
Right.
And so that internal psychological thinking or paradigm is that if it's not so bad, I'll just kind of let it go. I'll let it alone. And then I have these moments over and over and over again that something bothers me or is annoying or frustrating. But the idea of the distress that would be required to change it feels too overwhelming, so I just avoid it.
Yeah, one of the examples they use in the paper as they plot it out, if you just think simply and not with problems, is that if I decide everything within a mile, I'm just going to walk to, because it's not worth the trouble of getting out my bike and cuffing my pants and doing all this stuff. But then everything beyond a mile, I'll ride a bike. Because I have this threshold for discomfort or action, I'm actually limiting how fast I can get to everywhere within a mile.
Right.
And really kind of pushing up against that boundary. So when we apply it to other things in our life, whether it's our interpersonal, our coping mechanisms that we have, and these defense responses like cognitive dissonance, right? How am I making a decision about action? And a lot of times it's super unconscious. So we can think about, cohabitating, being in a bad relationship that's just not too bad.
Right.
Or being in a job that isn't a job where I'm thriving and that I'm really, fulfilled and have a lot of purpose, but it's just not too bad.
Pays the bills, you don't mind going, your boss is all right, your coworkers are okay, and the stuff that you do every day doesn't suck that bad.
And a lot of times, you know, we have this shared friend, and we'll go do these amazing experiences, and you look at him and you're like, hey, what'd you think of that? And he says, well, that didn't suck. And that's just as, you know, exactly what I'm talking to. Right? And it's like, that's a lens that we all kind of look at in a lot of ways. And so, yes, we might imagine a job or a career or a lifestyle that we really, really want. But then subconsciously, we start stacking up the difficulty and the discomfort against us.
Right.
And so I think of it, you know, anybody that's tuned into your show, you know, if we take trauma out of it, if we think about how our brains work, right? This is my prefrontal cortex, and this is my limbic system. This is my, you know, judges safety and danger. And so in a calm state, on a 0 to 10, I'm thinking, I'm, you know, dreaming about the future that I want and contemplating existence and all these things, rest, digest. And then, you know, as my safety starts to be compromised, you know, I get about halfway. I like to look at it as my eyes, my senses are straight out like, ooh, what's that, right? So I start getting some information that things might need something.
Right.
And then when my lid fully flips, I'm in action. I'm in freeze, fight, or flight. So if we take trauma out of it and we just say, how does this mechanism work and how we take action in our everyday lives, it's kind of the same thing. And I see the region beta paradox as being the spring that automatically keeps that lid down. It's trying to keep us from blowing up our lives because if we're constantly reacting to things, then we can't develop complex tribal systems and societies and achieve long-term goals, right? We're a squirrel. We get distracted by the next thing or whatever. So it seems to me like there's this mechanism that keeps us going in the status quo on the path.
Sure.
And it's this resistance to action. And it's only when our system goes, whoa, that was really, really bad, that I go into, it doesn't have to be traumatic fight or flight, but I go, I'm going to do something about it. So a common scenario would be, you know, I'm in the job that I don't really like. I'm languishing. I'm burnt out. It's not fulfilling to me. It's just a grind. I can't wait to not do it every day, but I need it. It's my financial stability. It's maybe the connection I have to people, the market, you know, the job market isn't good. The economy's not, whatever the things are that keep that, you know, my lid down and keep me doing the status quo, death by 1,000 cuts. And then there's a layoff or I'm fired for something, right? And then I'm like, oh no, I would have predicted that would have been the worst possible outcome, that I lost the job. But then I lose the job and I'm forced into action. So now I actually find a job that aligns with, you know, that's fulfilling, that gives me purpose. Or
you get to learn something new. You get to create new relationships. You now like your boss a little bit better, and you didn't realize it was so bad in the alternate position. And so you didn't bother to change your circumstances until it got so bad and you had no choice and you were forced to change it.
Yeah, and I think the realization is the key piece, right? This is an unconscious bias. This isn't the calculus that our prefrontal cortexes use. This is that, am I safe? Am I stable? How do I maintain the status quo, as opposed to just this really reactionary
And do
response?
I want to look for a new job and have to go through the anxiety of interviewing and upset my schedule and have to prove myself to my new coworkers and my boss, and I'm already liked well enough over here, and so then I have to start all over again, and all of that distress that would be part of, you know, exploring a new opportunity would be so overwhelming, or overwhelming enough that I just go, nah, I'm not going to bother with that.
And I see it everywhere.
Right.
You know, we were talking about this earlier. I have this bum shoulder. I've had this shoulder injury for quite a while. I can't really get my arm super high, and it's this nagging discomfort. But I'm, you know, in my mind, I say, oh, surgery. I'm going to be laid up for X number of months, and summer's coming and I'll put that off, or, you know, it's going to be a very painful recovery, or whatever that is. So I'm stacking the deck against action.
Right.
And I'm supporting inaction. But what's happened is that I have this really annoying, persistent injury that's going on for much longer than if I had said, ow, that hurts, and gone to the doctor and got the scans and done the physical therapy, right? So now I'm having to wait till it's bad enough, and I'm like, uh-oh, honey, I might need some help shaving my head, right? It's become bad enough that I now need to do something about it. And I think that really kind of summarizes this thing, is that we just sit there and we tolerate.
Well, and you talked about the example of being in a job, but even if you're in a position of leadership or a position of choosing who's working for you, whether it's a cleaning lady or an employee or your yard person, or even going to, let's say you're going to a specific coffee shop and they have something that keeps going wrong. When I was thinking about it when we were chatting about this for the show, I had an employee a while back that was okay. She got the job done. She was nice enough to our clients.
She was not so bad.
She was not so bad, yeah. But there were things that she did that weren't up to my satisfaction, and she tended to have persistent personal crises, and it would pull her out of doing a good job. And we might have that happen for a day or a half a day or whatever else. And during those times, I liked her as a person, and so I had compassion for her personal experiences that were, regular crisis. And at the same time, I suffered the loss of the employee that I really wanted during those times, and thinking about putting a job out on Indeed and going through the interview process and blocking my calendar for however many hours I needed to find somebody new. And then, the pain of retraining a person, all of those things just sounded horrible. And then an experience happened where, she did something that really, from an ethical perspective, left me no choice, but I had to let her go. And it was awful. I mean, you remember we were on vacation and we were supposed to be able to have our time off. And because I had to let her go immediately because of what she had done, it was like, I don't have a choice. I have to take these 3 days of our vacation and I have to now find a new person. We can't run our business without someone answering the phones. And it was so frustrating. And then what we ended up finding was like such an awesome person to help us. And had I done that sooner, it would have been, in our best interest. But I think to your point, the steps that it would have taken to make that happen were so frustrating. And so
in the way that we stack up what that change would
Right.
be, right? How long would it take to find somebody
Right.
and then onboard somebody? And so what comes to my mind in that situation is this old idiom, the devil we know is better than the devil we don't.
Right.
And so we tend to do that in so many situations where, and because of our defense mechanisms, like cognitive dissonance, like in our different coping mechanisms, when we suffer this discomfort, but it doesn't cross the threshold
Right.
of too bad,
Right.
then our defense mechanisms kick in and we start to rationalize it, or we start, to resolve that cognitive dissonance. And in a way we do that is when we stack up the blocks and we put more cushion between the action boundary until we're forced
Right.
into action. So,
Getting laid off or
two
having
points
to
on
fire
that.
someone.
You and I owe each other a vacation still.
Yep.
Make that happen. And second, like looking at that in so many facets of our life, right? So not just as the employer, in my main job, I've been in technology and specifically productivity. So looking at, for 30 years. So it's looking at what's the relationship between humans and technology and the workplace. And, over the last, 15 years or so, it's been very fascinating in looking at multi-generational workforces. We have 5 generations in the same workforce, all having different habits and styles. So starting to think from a systems perspective, how do we adjust?
Right.
And how do we adapt and evolve as people? And then technology's changing. COVID was a huge game changer when it came to how people worked and how they did their value proposition for where and how they worked. And so we watched large organizations have to change that. We think about hybrid work or remote work and the value proposition that people have and what they do and where their too bad enough threshold actually lies.
Right.
So to me, it's really fascinating. Microsoft's done a lot of work called the Work Labs, where we look at what that value proposition is for people. And when we start looking at the data around things like thriving versus languishing, burnout, presenteeism, which is I'm showing up to work, but I'm bringing 80% of myself, right? For a while, it was called this quiet quitting, where I'm only there like 50%, but I'm in the seat. Or absenteeism, lots of sick days, lots of, I didn't show up, kind of like the employee experience you were talking about. And so when we start to look at what are the things that are driving that, I see region beta paradox. I see both an employee and an employer who's, the employee is saying the gig is good enough, it's not bad enough to warrant a change, and the employer is going, it's good enough. It's not worth, disrupting my culture or training leadership or having new goals and outcomes outlined or engaging people or getting new employees or training those employees. So we sit in this purgatory of not bad enough in
Right.
so many aspects of our life. And now I'm just kind of like Rain Man, like region beta paradox. It's everywhere. It's everywhere.
Right. So I think we have a pretty good idea about what this concept is. And I am sure, as a listener, you're thinking about all the areas, whether you're cohabitating with a person who's okay, or your roommate's all right enough, or anything that might be, status quo, and not wanting to go through the internal distress or the overwhelm or the anxiety of making those changes. So let's talk now about how do we get past that? What do we do so that we can change things in our lives that aren't so bad, but we'd like to see it different.
Whether I'm working with Fortune 500 corporate customers on productivity and culture and technology, or whether I'm talking to a client in my counseling office, I think the first step to anything is making it conscious.
Right.
Right. Understanding that there's something there, that we all have this spring. This isn't pathology.
Right.
It's not a result of trauma.
Right.
The trauma might affect how loose or tight
Sure,
that spring is.
that makes sense.
But it's just there. It's like, how do I handle discomfort and when do I go into action? And so bringing awareness to it and making it conscious means that those unconscious defense mechanisms that we have to rationalize, to reason, to resolve cognitive dissonance, then those become conscious as well. We can't just blindly and unconsciously walk through life and expect things to change unless we don't take action.
If nothing changes, nothing changes.
One of my favorite quotes is, I think it's Lao Tzu, if I'll probably say it wrong, but it's basically, you're likely to end up where you're heading if you don't change direction.
Right.
And so bringing that to awareness and saying, why am I in the job or the relationship or the house or the situation I am, and not just pushing off action? How can I take any action to build a better life? And I think that's something, we've done a previous episode on our agreements and our relationship about how we go through life and long-term planning.
Right.
In long-term planning, that just means I'm having iterative steps of action that I'm willing to take. And a lot of us get stuck in this analysis paralysis where we sit there and go, I can't take any action. James Clear talks about this in Atomic Habits a lot, is this planning before the action. And we can stay in this spot and we can commiserate around how bad things are. We can rationalize how not so bad they are. We can talk about preparing to take action. And until we cross that threshold of discomfort to actually move into action, nothing changes.
Right.
And so bringing that to awareness is step one.
Dr. Becky talked about it on that episode on her Good Inside podcast. Do you remember we were talking about it? And she talked about, if there's a fear of moving forward and the action plans are too many, and you think about the steps that need to be taken, and you think about, let's say there's 7 steps and you aren't making any moves forward. We talked about, and she talked about in that episode, then the first step was too big.
Yeah, the way I recall it was
Right.
a teacher or something told her that. It's
Right.
like if you're finding yourself in procrastination or inaction, it's because the first step's too big. So cut it in half, make it smaller. And if it's still, then make it smaller, make it smaller, make it smaller. And so I think philosophically that makes sense because I have a clearly stated goal and I want to do that. But with the region beta paradox, we're saying by default, my stated goal is status quo.
Right.
Right? So it's almost the opposite of that. How do I stretch that spring a little bit? And even just to recognize my own propensities to want to stay the course and to tolerate.
I can think of an example that I think a lot of people would relate to. My closet is the bane of my existence. It is so overwhelming. It is so stressful. I've got too many clothes for the given space. I struggle with determining if I should let something go. I've got some scarcity stuff in my history related to what if I don't have it again, or what if I need this tank top again? And when I think about the discomfort I feel every single time I walk into my closet, it's so frustrating. But then when I think about having to give up a whole day to clean my closet, that sounds terrible. And so I think about the Dr. Becky analogy that she talked about. And so now when I look at my closet, I feel like I can take a bite. I know that it's a problem I want to deal with. And so instead of thinking I need to do my whole closet, I can handle the tank tops. And I can go through just the tank tops.
I can move a nest so I can close the door.
Right. Well, it's not that bad. But I'm just saying, I can't think about doing it with my whole closet. And then I have to try everything on. And then I have to deal with shame if something's too tight or doesn't fit or whatever. When it's an easy situation or an easy question, like a shirt is pilly, that's easy enough for me to put in the donation pile.
Yeah.
But if it kind of fits, or I liked it once, or I remember going somewhere in it and I liked the experience, it becomes overwhelming to me. So I think trimming down that first step is a good example about, I might recognize there's an issue that I want to change, and the overwhelm of doing my whole closet seems like too much. And so then I'm frustrated every time I go to get dressed. Take a small step.
I think we
that's
can.
the other piece that we want to talk about, is just taking a small step, starting somewhere.
I think we can all relate to that. What I'm seeing in my mind as we talk about it, region beta paradox, right, is what we're talking about is moving the threshold of discomfort.
Sure.
And that's you almost just illustrated the unconscious reaction to staying underneath that threshold. So, I can go in my closet and I see stuff on my floor, and as long as I can safely step over and navigate it without putting a footprint in my favorite whatever, right? Then I can go, okay, it's fine, because the big thing of cleaning the closet is overwhelming. And what I've heard you describe is, well, chunk up the progress so that I can do the littlest amount of action as possible without having to cross the threshold. And what I would challenge you to consider is think of a time that, for whatever reason, maybe we were moving and you had no choice but to go into the closet. And then you went into the closet and you cleaned it.
Right.
How good did you feel after you took that big step? So the piece to take away from this is, what does it take to take action to cross the threshold? Because we believe going over that threshold causes pain and discomfort and uncertainty.
And we avoid it.
And so we avoid it. It's a risk management strategy, and we avoid it. So we either do kind of what you just described, which is we lower the threshold, we take smaller bites, we do everything in our unconscious power to stay on this side of the threshold, because we believe crossing the threshold is too hard, is not worth it, it's going to be too painful.
My closet isn't bad enough, it's organized enough.
And that discomfort will last a long time.
Sure.
But the inverse is true. What the peculiar longevity of things not so bad tells us, what this region beta paradox is we're actually prolonging the discomfort by staying on this side of the threshold.
As you're talking about it, I'm imagining giving up part of my weekend and just doing it. And then thinking about how good I feel that it's just been handled. And every time I go to get dressed, I'm proud of myself, which motivates future behavior. I'm excited about it.
And that's great, because you're tapped into your dopaminergic system, and you can imagine having done that enough that,
I've done
I know
enough
I will
things
feel
that
good.
were hard that I know what it feels like.
But so many people that get stuck in the region beta zone, and they don't cross that comfort, that threshold of discomfort until it's too bad.
Sure.
I think they build up more associations with avoiding things that are too bad.
I would
and
totally
they don't
agree
always
with that.
redo their calculus and go, oh, wait a minute, that wasn't so bad, right?
And life doesn't meet us on our terms. And so when something happens that is out of our control, that forces us to move forward, we then can go, even though it was terrible that I got fired from my job, I'm really glad that it happened, because it forced me to, to stretch a little bit and to face those discomforts, ultimately improving the quality of my life eventually.
And knowing, so I think the couple of lessons are, one, bringing it to awareness, right? Everything that we do, we improve when we can bring our subconscious, unconscious to consciousness. And
noticing.
Be in relationship with it. We notice. The second thing is asking ourselves, why am I resisting change? Is that rational? Is my spring wound too tight where I'm going to suffer death by 1,000 cuts because, what am I afraid of? And then bringing that into consciousness as well, and having that kind of plan to move through it.
Well, I so appreciate you coming on this show today to discuss this, one of your favorite topics, and hopefully this becomes a good resource for future clients that we can refer them to understand when we see it with our clients. And hopefully you, as the listener, are resonating with some of these ideas and are maybe feeling a little bit motivated to make some bigger changes, perhaps without the universe forcing you to do so that you can really live to your best, fullest fruition and live your best life, and not have something out of your control require you to do so.
And if you're not motivated to action, think about it.
Right? Stay stuck. If nothing changes, nothing changes. So, Patrick, thank you so much for being here with me today. I always enjoy our conversations. and appreciate your time and your passion to look into new concepts and your willingness to be the maven on these sorts of topics. I really appreciate it. So thank you.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you so much for tuning in today to Adaptable. We hope this inspires you to make some changes in your life. And if you're thinking of someone that this reminds you of, please feel free to share this episode to help them, maybe bump them through to making some changes to improve their lives. But until we meet again, don't forget to lead with love. It'll never steer you wrong.